Chapter 1081. Xiaoxin nodded and immediately turned around. Wow, Daddy is going to do something bad. Is he going to fight with the fairies? So excited. Pei Chi looked at their tacit cooperation and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Why did she think that the little girl was innocent and cute? She was a little devil. Or did she often cheat girls with her father? There was some suspicion in her eyes, but her little hand was forcefully caught by a gentle big palm. Tang Yu grabbed her hand and said in a low voice, "You need to feel for yourself whether it is true or not." Pei Chi lowered her head and widened her eyes in disbelief. She struggled but couldn't break free. Then it was indescribable. However, he only held her down for 2 seconds before letting go. His large palm landed on her waist. He held her and said in a low voice, "Don't stare at me there anymore." Pei Chi's mind was in a mess. What did he mean by staring at him there? Tang Yu took a step back and said, "Miss Pei, you can go now." Pei Chi had been humiliated in an eerie manner. She glared at him and gritted her teeth. "You bastard! Thank you for bringing Xiaoxin back." In the face of her gnashing teeth, he became graceful again. Pei Chi turned around and left. She felt that she couldn't stay in this hotel anymore. She wanted to move out immediately, but reality slapped her in the face. She ordered the most expensive French food on the first floor, but when she paid, she found that her card couldn't be swiped. After swiping it several times, the manager came over and presented her card. He said apologetically, "I'm sorry, Mississippi. You have other cards, or you can pay in cash." Pei Chi was puzzled. "What's wrong?" The manager said, "Your card has been frozen." Pei Chi felt that there was a flash of lightning above her head. She dialed Qin Anlin's number. When the call went through, Qin Anlin sounded exhausted. "Chi, I was the one who stopped your card. Contact Kime. He will arrange everything for you." Pei Chi was stunned. After a while, she said softly, "Anlin, what are you afraid of?" Qin Anlin's heart ached. After a while, he said, "Chi, don't mess around. I'll be back in a month. Go home and live there." He was exhausted, and she was disobedient, so he could only stop her card. However, he had underestimated her rebellious mentality. In the past 2 years, he had taken good care of her and knew that she couldn't endure hardship. So, when he stopped her card, she would obediently return to his apartment. But he was wrong. The more he restrained her, the more she wanted freedom. In Pei Chi's heart, they were not husband and wife, but family. His domineering and possessive feelings made her feel suffocated. She longed for freedom. After Qin Anlin said that, Pei Chi said faintly, "Anlin, I'm not going back." After saying that, she hung up and pulled out her SIM card. She searched her bag for all the cash and barely paid for the meal. Then, she fell into a very bleak situation. How could she pay 30,000 a day for a suite? Fortunately, she had paid 3 days in advance, so she didn't have to mortgage herself here. After getting back 3,300 yuan from the front desk, Pei Chi was completely homeless on the streets. Carrying a small suitcase and wearing a small straw hat, she walked on the streets of B City, kicking pebbles. Chapter 1082. 3,300 yuan. Even if she stayed in a hotel that cost 200 yuan a day, she could only survive for 10 days. Ever since she lost her memory, this was the first time Pei Chi had to worry about money. Kicking a pebble. How good would it be if she could kick a big gold nugget? Pei Chi felt that she should look for a job. It would be perfect if she could meet a good boss who would give her a salary in advance. She bought a newspaper and a piece of bread and sat on a bench by the road to read. The bread was hard and she couldn't eat it at all. However, she forced herself to eat it because her stomach was growling. Pei Chi. Next, French food, Italian food. All kinds of fancy food have nothing to do with you. Same for the presidential suite. She wasn't a greedy person. She didn't intend to give Anlin love, and she couldn't give it to him. Therefore, she couldn't ask him to feed her for the rest of her life. She used a pen to draw circles in suitable places and prepared to check it out tomorrow. Most of the jobs she chose were in the photography profession, and the salary wasn't too high. After working for a long time, she put the newspaper aside and focused on eating the horrible bread. Suddenly, the sky changed and the wind started to blow. The rain also dripped down, like beans in a hurry. Pei Chi hurriedly pulled her luggage and wanted to hide in the pavilion. However, the newspaper she left on the bench was blown away by the wind and floated into the middle of the road. She quickly ran over to pick it up. She picked up the muddy newspaper in the rain and ran back desperately. A black limousine screeched to a stop in front of her. The driver was about to get out of the car, but the girl on the road turned her head and the driver was stunned. Lao Zhao turned his head and said with a trembling voice, "Sir, it's young Madam." Tang Yu, who was sitting in the back seat, was very calm. "Just pretend that you don't know her. She forgot everything." Lao Zhao was stunned. Forgot? However, although Sir's tone was calm, there was a hint of pain in it. It wasn't as calm as what he said. It was raining now, and Lao Zhao couldn't sit in the car alone. He quickly took an umbrella and got out of the car to help Tang Yu. It was a rainy evening on the streets of B City. Pei Chi stood in the rain awkwardly. The rainwater kept pouring into her mouth and soaking her clothes. She stood there with her mouth slightly open, staring blankly at him walking towards her. "Get in the car." He frowned and put his arm around her shoulders as they walked towards the car. Pei Chi was still holding the newspaper in her hand. She walked a few steps in a daze before she came back to her senses. "My luggage." Tang Yu followed her gaze and instructed old Zhao, "Bring Miss Pei's luggage here." Old Zhao passed the umbrella to Tang Yu and ran over in the rain. He quickly carried the umbrella into the trunk. When he got into the car, he wiped his face. The rain came so fast. He paused for a moment before asking, "Sir, where are we going now?" Originally, Tang Yu had an important contract to sign. Now that he met Pei Chi, it was impossible for him to go. "Back to the rose garden," he said briefly before throwing a towel to Pei Chi. "Wipe yourself." In fact, her clothes were all wet. She had to change into dry clothes immediately, or she would have a fever. He knew very well how fragile her body was. Chapter 1083. With that, he hung up the phone and looked at Pei Chi because she was looking at him. Pei Chi asked slowly, "Why did you lie?" Tang Yu's lips curved. Foreign men value their families very much. Such a reason would convince them. Sounds like an unscrupulous businessman. Pei Chi pouted and shifted her body, probably because her clothes were wet and uncomfortable. Tang Yu looked at her white t-shirt that had become a little transparent because of the rain. His gaze deepened. "Old Zhao, drive faster." Old Zhao smiled bitterly. This was already very fast. In less than half an hour, the car arrived at the rose garden. When they passed through the black carved gate, the entire rose garden was lit up. The roses in the rain emitted a charming luster in the dark. Pei Chi sat in the car and leaned against the window. "So many roses. This is the rose garden, the place where I live." Tang Yu's tone was very calm. Pei Chi turned her head and looked at him. The place where he lived? She was just glad that she was saved, but she forgot where he was taking her. This was his home? Pei Chi bit her lips and said after a long time, "I think your wife would not want you to bring a woman home." "She's gone." Tang Yu's voice was very calm, but there was a hint of sadness in it. The little rabbit was immediately fooled. She looked at his sad face with sympathy and said with uncertainty, "I'm sorry, I didn't do it on purpose." Tang Yu turned his head. His eyes were a little bright. "Stay for one night." He looked at the newspaper in her hand and picked it up to take a few glances. "Looking for a job as a photographer?" Pei Chi replied. Tang Yu did not say anything else and just carried her luggage into the hall. Pei Chi stood at the entrance of the hall like a drowned rat, afraid that she would dirty the pure white wool carpet. "Why don't you come in?" He tilted his head to look at her, and then saw her nervous expression. He smiled faintly and asked someone to pass her a pair of slippers. Then, he paused for a moment before saying, "Go upstairs and take a shower. Change your clothes, or you'll catch a cold." Pei Chi nodded. Now was not the time to be willful. She herself knew that her body was not strong enough. Once she had a fever, it would be over. She followed the maid upstairs. Lao Zhao carried her luggage upstairs and came down after a while. "Sir?" Old Zhao scratched his head and said innocently, "Sir, why don't you recognize young madam? Chi-Chi's health isn't good." Obviously, Tang Yu didn't have any intention to say more. Old Zhao also tactfully retreated. He thought that since he was here, he wouldn't be able to escape. Pei Chi entered a guest room. Her body was too uncomfortable, so she went straight to the bathroom to take a shower. But when she came out and opened her suitcase, she was stunned. Her clothes were all wet. What to do? She would catch a cold if she wore wet clothes. She couldn't always run around the hall in a bathrobe, right? The arrogant Mr. Tang might even think that she was deliberately seducing him. That wouldn't be good. Pei Chi still hid behind the door and called out to the maid outside like a kitten. "Can you lend me a set of clothes?" The maid only saw a head. She was stunned for a moment and immediately nodded. "Yes, miss." Chapter 1084. She almost screamed. "Why are you here? No one else but Tang you could have those well-defined, slender, and good-looking fingers. I was just passing by, so I was passing by." As he said that, he retracted his hand and did not look like he was up to no good. Pei Chi's heart was beating a little fast. She leaned against the door. After all, she was naked just now, and she was separated by the door from a man, and he even handed her clothes. She looked at the clothes in her hands. It was a maid outfit, and it must have been handed to him by the maid just now. She was too naive. Pei Chi changed into the clothes. They fit her surprisingly well, but this skirt seemed a little too short. She really wondered if this was a maid outfit or a Sailor Moon warrior outfit. However, it was better than not having dry clothes to wear. She opened the door and was about to go down when she saw Tang Yu standing by the railing. His back was facing her, and his hands were on the railing. When he heard her voice, he turned his body slightly, and then his gaze froze. His voice was a little hoarse. "The clothes fit me well." Pei Chi was a little embarrassed as she looked at her clothes, and then she looked up. "You're not asking me to pay for the room tonight, are you?" He curled his lips into a smile and walked directly to the hall downstairs. "Let's go downstairs and eat." At this moment, she realized that he had also changed into a set of clothes. He was wearing khaki casual pants with a white shirt on top. The hem of the shirt hung down casually, and it looked very homey, but it still could not hide his noble temperament. The man in front of her was the kind of person who, no matter how casually he dressed, could still be seen to be noble in his bones. Pei Chi wiped her saliva and followed him downstairs. When she got down, she saw that Xiaoxin was already sitting at the dining table. When she saw Pei Chi, she sweetly called out, "Little sister." Pei Chi waved her hand, like a lucky cat. Now that the adult and the child were her sugar daddy, for a homeless stray cat like her, they were people that she could not afford to offend. Tang Yu looked at her and found it funny. He sat down and said very calmly, "Let's eat." Pei Chi looked at the dishes. They were all dishes that she liked. She was very satisfied and ate with satisfaction. It was raining outside, but the lights in the hall were pleasant and the temperature was just right. Especially with her full stomach, Pei Chi felt like she was going to stay here for the rest of her life. After all, it was embarrassing. Her sugar daddy, Qin Anlin, might not be willing to adopt her, unless she was willing to be his real wife and sleep with him. Pei Chi didn't want to force herself, nor could she force herself. She smiled sweetly at Tang Yu. She had no idea how much he wanted to pounce on her when she was dressed like this and smiling at him like this. "Are you going to sleep in the bedroom I was in?" she asked with a smile, her temper gone. Tang Yu nodded. "Good night." Xiaoxin widened her eyes and looked at her papa. "Xiaoxin wants to sleep with mommy." Tang Yu glanced at her. Xiaoxin immediately changed her words. "Xiaoxin wants to sleep with little sister." The father said without thinking, "Then you go to sleep." Xiaoxin immediately went upstairs. Tang Yu smiled and went upstairs to the study first. He couldn't wait to have her, but she was here now, so she couldn't run away. Looking at her expression, he knew that her card had been suspended. Qin Anlin had been too concerned and had done the stupidest thing without even realizing it. In 1 month, Chi would be his. Chapter 1085. Pei Chi did not sleep immediately, but she would rather stay in the bedroom than spend time with the father and daughter. Wearing the sexy maid outfit, she stretched and pressed her legs in front of the floor-to-ceiling window in the bedroom. Then, she frowned and pulled up her skirt. No matter how she pulled it up, she felt that the skirt couldn't cover anything, and it barely covered her small butt. She pulled it down with all her might, but the fabric actually fell with a tearing sound and was torn into two pieces. So weak? She suspected that the male owner here was a pervert and designed the maid costume to be easily torn by the male owner. Facing the French window, Pei Chi imitated the man and pulled hard, then coughed lightly. "It's useless even if you shout yourself hoarse." She laughed as she said that. Just as she said that, the door was opened, and a small head appeared at the door. Pei Chi was shocked and turned her head to look. "It's that Xiaoxin," Pei Chi thought immorally in her heart. "Xiaoxin, little gorilla, can I sleep here?" Xiaoxin at the door was hugging a pillow, and her long hair was let down, which was a little curly. She was wearing a white lace nightgown, and she was deliberately trying to seduce Pei Chi. Pei Chi immediately put down the dress fabric in her hand, and it was a little funny when a large piece of fabric was missing. She put her hands behind her back. "Children should develop the habit of being independent. Dad said I don't need to be independent," Xiaoxin said proudly. Well, Pei Chi felt that the princess in front of her really did not need to be independent, just like if she listened to Anlin, then she would not need to be independent. But what was the fun in that kind of life? At least, she could not love someone, and she could not listen to all his arrangements for the sake of food and clothing. Pei Chi was quite optimistic at this time, and did not feel that she had fallen into a wolf's den. She looked at the little girl in front of her, and still wanted to persuade her. "But you can't just sleep with strangers, right?" Xiaoxin looked at her, and suddenly pulled out an evil smile. Her little body came in, and she sat on her bed, hugging the pillow. That little expression made Pei Chi's hair stand. "Oh right, little sister, girls can't just casually go home with strangers." Xiaoxin grinned at her, revealing her eerie white teeth. It was extremely hateful. Pei Chi finally understood what it meant to lift a rock only to smash one's own foot. She stared at her little heart, at that little rascal. Xiaoxin lay down and rolled a few times on the bed with a very happy expression on her face. She stopped and fell asleep. He fell asleep just like that? Her chubby little feet and meaty little hands were still hanging in the air. She fell asleep just like that? However, the little naughty thing was still quite cute when it was sprawled on its back. Pei Chi could not help but walk over and touch the little guy. He did not move at all. She breathed out a fragrant and sweet breath. Her little body was warm and had the unique, milky smell of a child. Looking at her from such a close distance, he could see that her long eyelashes were so thick, her little nose was straight, and her beautiful little mouth was red and moist. Her eyes were closed, and she looked like a little angel. Xiaoxin's seduction was successful. Pei Chi's heart melted as she looked at her. She wanted to reach out and touch her, but she was afraid that she would wake up the little angel, so she carefully straightened her limbs and covered them with a thin blanket. She looked like she was sleeping well. Chapter 1086. Pei Chi took off her pajamas and immediately went to bed carefully. She hugged the baby. It smelled so good. It was warm under the blanket, and the sound of the rain outside was also very beautiful. The lights were dimmed. This was the best sleep Pei Chi had ever had since she lost her memory. However, it was not as beautiful as before. It was a rainy night in early summer. As the rain got heavier, there were a few muffled thunders in the sky, followed by a loud rumble. Xiaoxin and Pei Chi woke up at the same time and screamed. Then, they hugged each other and screamed. It was too scary. Xiaoxin buried herself in Pei Chi's arms. She was so anxious that she habitually looked for a pacifier. There was none, so she bit Pei Chi. She was not wearing any underwear. Xiaoxin was very satisfied with the bite. Although it was separated by clothes, it was still soft. Perhaps it was because she was comforted. Xiaoxin calmed down a lot. After all, she was a child. After a while, she would be more obedient with someone hugging her. However, Pei Chi could not fall asleep. She was hugging a baby who was biting her. She could not move at all. She could still listen to the thunder outside, one after another. However, when the lights in the bedroom suddenly went out, she could not help but scream. Xiaoxin was startled awake in her arms. Then, the two of them faced each other and started screaming. That scene. The door was opened, and a slender figure stood in the dim light. Xiaoxin stretched out her chubby little arms. Daddy? Hug? Pei Chi-Chi's expression was as if she was struck by lightning. After a while, the bed obviously sank and the baby in her arms was carried to the side. Her arms were empty. At that moment, Pei Chi-Chi was disappointed. That kind of disappointment overshadowed her fear of thunder. A mellow and charming voice was heard. Baby, don't be afraid. Daddy is here. It was Tang Yu who was comforting Xiaoxin. However, Pei Chi-Chi's ears were a little hot because the voice was so close to her. It was as if he was comforting her. She secretly scolded herself in her heart. Pei Chi-Chi, you're hopeless. Wasn't it just a man? Wasn't it just 15 centimeters? There was suddenly another man on the bed. Naturally, she couldn't sleep on it anymore. Moreover, the other party was the male master. She should find another place to sleep. However, as soon as Pei Chi-Chi moved, there was a clap of thunder outside, and the lightning lit up the room like it was daytime. She screamed and immediately jumped back onto the bed, hugging the living thing. Tang Yu. Her soft and slender body trembled in his arms, her little hands clutching his 15 cm. Tang Yu's breathing became shallow. His entire body was tense, and his blood surged, transforming into beast blood. If not for Xiaoxin in his arms, he would have pounced on her. He held his breath and tried not to move. He was afraid that he would scare her. One of Pei Chi-Chi's little hands was holding onto his waist. She clutched his clothes tightly, and the other hand was also clutching him tightly. Tang Yu couldn't help but make a hissing sound. Miss Pei, you're going to break me. Pei Chi-Chi was still screaming in his arms. Xiaoxin was also screaming in response. Xiaoxin revealed her eerie little teeth. How could there be someone in this world who was afraid of thunder? Mommy is so useless. Xiaoxin screamed with all her might. Her little hand clutched onto Tang Yu, and after a while, she laughed quietly. Pei Chi-Chi was stunned. Her hand slipped, and then she felt that she had touched something that she shouldn't have touched. Chapter 1087. Her face was completely red, and she let go of his hand. At this moment, another bolt of lightning flashed past. Pei Chi-Chi's little face turned pale. With his back facing the window, under the white light, his expression and gaze seemed even more unfathomable, his eyes clear and bright. Suddenly, she felt that the place where her palm had just held was burning hot. Pei Chi-Chi bit her lip and looked at him helplessly. She was frightened by her own body. She held her little hand, forgetting about the thunder that she was most afraid of. She forgot about the rainy night outside and just looked at the man in front of her. The white light flickered, but it was enough for her to see him clearly. The white bathrobe he was wearing had been torn open, revealing a small part of his chest. He was not a particularly muscular man, but he was slender and well-built. His handsome facial features made one want to fall in love with him. Fei. Pei Chi-Chi swallowed hard. Her little hand gently touched his handsome face, and then his Adam's apple. Her little hand moved downwards and stopped. She wanted to retract her hand. Her hand was held by a strong and large palm. Then, Tang Yu's voice sounded a little hoarse. Why don't you continue? She shrank back suddenly, and his hand grabbed her forcefully. Suddenly, he let go of his little heart, and with a nimble flip, he flipped over to her side. As she gasped in surprise, she fell into his arms, and her little hand pressed against his chest helplessly, and the little heart behind him was drumming up its courage, and it moved backward. She closed her eyes. Daddy Mommy was about to fight with the vixen. Her little heart could not see or hear anything. Tang Yu's face was bewitching. He held her little hand and moved it downward slowly. Aren't you curious? No. Her voice was extremely weak. At this moment, she felt that she had fallen into a wolf's den. But she still wanted to go to Amo. Her little hand was very curious, and she moved it downwards. Tang Yu's dark eyes were deep, and he looked at her shy and timid look. Her long hair was scattered on the snow-white pillow, and her thin shoulders were hidden under the blanket. Her little hand only touched it for a while before she retracted it, not daring to touch it again. Don't you want to touch 15? He suddenly pulled her closer and pressed his lips against hers, his voice low and husky. Pei Chi shook her head, but her eyes were fixed on his sexy Adam's apple. She leaned forward and kissed that spot, as if she was holding a milk bottle with her little heart. His body was like a poison that attracted her. She knew she shouldn't, but in such a dark night, she indulged herself. Those crazy desires that she had never had for Anlin were all realized by this man who could be called a stranger in front of her. She hugged him and gnawed on him like a puppy gnawing on a bone. Her ferocity made Tang Yu speechless. How long had it been since she had eaten meat? Her bathrobe was unbuttoned, and she buried her face in it. Her hobby had not changed at all. She just nibbled on it for a while, and then retreated. With a thud, Pei Chi fell to the ground. She cried out and was immediately carried up. Her little head was rubbed gently, and her head was pillowed in the crook of his arm. She felt like she was being cared for. "Let go of me." She was a little angry from embarrassment, but this kind of anger came from herself. Because she had actually bitten him. She had done such a shameful thing to a man whom she had only met 3 times. No, she was the one who had done something shameful to him. Chapter 1088. For example, she could sit in his arms and ravage him to her heart's content. Pei Chi widened her eyes and looked at the man in front of her. Her eyes were wide open, and she looked as if she was going to die. Her long eyelashes fluttered and were overflowing with color. His Adam's apple bobbed, and he could not help but lower his head to kiss her little mouth. At the same time, he held her shoulders so that she would not have a chance to struggle. He was so aroused that he forgot that Xiaoxin was also on the same bed. He forgot that Xiaoxin was already 5 years old and had reached the age of maturity. He kissed her passionately, his burning hot lips rubbing against hers. She opened her eyes and looked at his intoxicated expression. Was he very comfortable? Under her fingertips, it was his taut body. Her little hands suddenly tightened because he was no longer satisfied with the contact of their lips and probed inside. She did not hate it when he kissed her deeply. It was not like how she resisted Anlin, but it was a little numb. Her whole body was numb. It was as soft as water, and all her senses were on her lips. It was not enough. She wanted more. Her little hands tugged at his shirt, and she could feel the muscles on his back. She raised her body and kissed him back with all her strength, like a little beast begging for love. Tang Yu's heart almost jumped out. He looked up and exhaled with difficulty. He looked deeply at the little person under him. She was like a ball of fire, so passionate that she wanted to burn him. The Chi-Chi in the past was not like this. She was so excited that she made him go crazy. His body ached and clamored for her, but he did not dare to. He hesitated. He did not care if she was someone else's wife, but he was afraid that his Chi-Chi would care. He was afraid that she would care about that empty book. When he looked up, she leaned forward again and kissed him twice. Her voice was a little hoarse. "What's wrong?" This time, his forbearance and restraint were completely disrupted. Tang Yu lowered his body and kissed her deeply. He kissed her firmly without any restraint. Her bathrobe was lifted, and wherever his big palms touched, his fingers almost melted on it. At that moment, Tang Yu almost burst into tears. That ball of fire suddenly sat up. Outside the window, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled from time to time. But Pei Chi thought that she might not be afraid anymore in the future because such a night would remind her of a beautiful body. She wanted to see him. When the bathrobe fell to the ground, her eyes glowed in the darkness, and they were bright green. Tang Yu leaned against the bed. There was an indescribable feeling in his heart, as if something was about to break out of the ground. "Hurry up." His voice was extremely hoarse as he urged her. Pei Chi bit her lip, and her forehead was sweating. She looked at it greedily and suddenly said, "Wait a minute." He watched her jump off the bed and thought to himself, is she going to get the tea? He wanted to strangle her. However, Pei Chi had brought a camera. She adjusted the focal length and took a few nude photos of his body in the dark. Tang Yu was stunned. He squinted at her and gritted his teeth. "Pei Chi, I'm very interested in your body." She raised the camera. "It's very tempting. Just now, She had taken the best photo she had ever taken. In the light and shadow, on the pure white bed, the man's bathrobe was thrown aside. The man leaned against the bed and his gaze was deep and full of invitation. That naked desire made her blush, and her heart beat faster. Chapter 1089. Tang Yu looked at her. Didn't you want it just now? He got up and hugged her from behind, his thin lips on her neck. Pei Chi immediately felt that he was in danger. She held the camera in her hand and said in a weak voice, "It's not fun. Mr. Tang, I think you should know that I have a husband. You've seen it at the airport." Really? He buried his face in her neck and held her waist with one hand, comforting her back and forth so that she had no chance to escape. He suddenly chuckled and bit her little neck. "Then now you're all ready, lying on the same bed as me." Pei Chi turned her face and was kissed by him. She suddenly froze. "Do you still dare to say that you don't want it?" He smiled and let go of her, and she trembled, feeling immeasurably ashamed. "Go take a shower, okay?" He whispered into her ear, his voice as hoarse as the sand. Then, he picked up his bathrobe and put it on, opened the door and went out. It was as if he just came to comfort them, who were afraid of thunder, and she was the one who seduced him. Pei Chi bit her lip and was about to go into the bathroom to tidy herself up when the little person suddenly said, "Sister, do you want to be my new mother?" Pei Chi's body froze, and she looked at the little person on the bed. The little heart was lying like a little angel, but it was smiling like a little devil. Pei Chi experienced the greatest humiliation she had ever experienced in her life. She thought that the male master was already very shameless, but she didn't expect this little one to be even worse. "I saw it all." The little thing giggled. "You bit Daddy." Pei Chi felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She lay down straight and covered herself with the quilt. "I must be dreaming." "Sister, you have to pay for it after eating it." The little devil leaned against her ear. "I'll forgive you if you become my new mother, and I won't tell anyone." Pei Chi pulled down the blanket. Was she going to tell others? Xiaoxin was somewhat pleased with herself. Pei Chi said slowly, "But I'm married." "That's even better." Xiaoxin bared her white teeth. "If you don't get together with Daddy, I'll tell everyone about how you bit Daddy's Lil J. I'll be so embarrassed." Pei Chi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Were all the kids nowadays so bad? She picked up the little rascal and walked outside. She was no longer afraid of the rumbling thunder outside. Furthermore, she could tell that this little rascal was not afraid at all. She found the bedroom on the east side. Her intuition told her that it was the master bedroom. She opened the bedroom door directly. The lights inside were dim, and only the bathroom lights were on. She put the little thing on the bed and said fiercely, "Sit here and don't move." She thought she should have a talk with the father of the child. With the rumbling thunder, Pei Chi tugged at her bathrobe, feeling like a female warrior. When she arrived at the door of the bathroom, she pulled the door open. Since she had already seen it, one more time would be an advantage. When she pulled the door open, Pei Chi wanted to say something, but she swallowed it back down. That was because the scene in the bathroom was especially adult. It was 100 times dirtier than she had imagined. Chapter 1090. She stood there stupidly, her feet moving to escape, but an arm pulled her in, and then the bathroom door closed. Pei Chi looked at the closed door and felt a little hopeless. She turned to the man in front of her. "Let go of me." Damn it, he was actually doing that. At this moment, there was hot air in the bathroom, and there was a hint of passion. It was very secretive and special. Pei Chi struggled, but Tang Yu held her down and said in a deep voice, "Don't move." His body was full of steam, and as he pressed against her, her bathrobe became damp and warm. Pei Chi turned her face away and bit her lips. "You're shameless." "Is that so?" Tang Yu pressed her shoulders and then continued what they were doing. Pei Chi screamed and squirmed, but her mouth was covered by him. Her eyes were wide open, and she could not believe that he was doing such a shameless thing to her. Probably because she was in his arms. He was fast. It only took a minute. Tang Yu was panting and leaning on her shoulders. The atmosphere was a little strange and uncomfortable. When had he ever been so fast? Pei Chi-Chi's head was leaning against the door and her eyes were a little dazed. She glared at him. "Mr. Tang, have we started?" After a while, she screamed again. "Oh, it's over." Was she mocking him? Tang Yu leaned on her shoulder and pressed his thin lips against her ear. His voice was low and hoarse. "Do you still want more?" "Want what?" She glared at him. He clearly didn't want it, but he had to say it so warmly. But when he said no, he already had it. Pei Chi felt uncomfortable. She lowered her head and hit his shoulders. So dirty. She ran under the water to wash off, but her bathrobe was completely soaked. It was like a second layer of skin sticking to her body. Tang Yu was originally full of desire, but looking at her now, he found it funny and leaned against the door to admire it. Deep down, his Chi-Chi had not changed at all. It was still his Chi-Chi, the little girl who only responded to him. He laughed in a low voice. Pei Chi stared at him. "Mr. Tang, I seriously suspect that you're not satisfied. You're a pervert." She didn't expect him to admit it directly. "I haven't had sex for 2 years. Does that count?" Pei Chi looked at him as if she was looking at a pervert and stumbled out. "Pervert." Little Xiaoxin was sitting on the bed. When she walked out, little Xiaoxin anxiously looked at her and confidently said, "You told me to sit here." Pei Chi tugged at her clothes. "Then continue to sit there and don't move." She ran out of the room in shame and indignation. Her little heart said coldly behind her, "Little sister, were you raped?" Pei Chi snorted lightly, glared at her, and ran away quickly. Thunder was still rumbling outside, but Pei Chi didn't think it was scary at all. The father and daughter were scarier. She went back to her bedroom and took a shower. She didn't wear any clothes and just lay under the blanket. But when she covered herself with the blanket, she could smell a man's secret scent. Pei Chi bit her lips and turned on the lights. She picked up the camera and looked at the 2 photos. Then, she connected the phone cable and sent it to her phone. She wrote in the phone file, 15 centimeters pervert. 1 minute, of course, what she wrote and the photos were sent to Tang Yu's phone. Chapter 1091. Tang Yu's eyelids twitched. He picked up his phone and glanced at it. Then he looked at Xiaoxin and said calmly, "You'll know when you grow up." He lifted the quilt and Xiaoxin snuggled into his arms. She looked up at her father, who was about to look at his phone. Xiaoxin was upset. She said pitifully, "I want to find Mommy. I want to sleep with Mommy." Tang Yu lowered his head and looked at his daughter. He coughed lightly and said, "Xiaoxin, some things can't be rushed. For example, if you go now, your sister might not like you anymore. You have to learn to loosen the reins only to grasp them better." "Yes, Mommy," Xiaoxin corrected him with a straight face. After a while, she asked, "What do you mean by playing hard to get? Is it like what Daddy does to Mommy? Grabbing Mommy and rubbing her back and forth? That's called playing hard to get?" Tang Yu said seriously, "What did you see?" Xiaoxin stopped talking. She knew that her father was going to be angry. She quickly flipped her little shares and said, "Daddy, I'm trading P shares. Xiaoxin won't peek next time." She buried her face in the pillow and giggled. Tang Yu's heart was in a mess. He never thought that his little game would be seen by his little daughter. He coughed. "Don't peek next time, especially." He thought for a while and said, "Especially when Daddy and Mommy aren't wearing clothes. But sometimes when Daddy isn't wearing clothes, he will." Xiaoxin's eyes were sparkling. Tang Yu had a headache. It was not a good thing to have a girl who was too smart and mature too early. He looked at Xiaoxin. After a while, Xiaoxin obediently lay in his arms. "I forgot everything." This little girl. Tang Yu held Xiaoxin with one hand and coaxed her to sleep. He held his phone with the other hand and read the content she wrote. Another message popped up on the phone. It read, "If Anlin finds out, I'll probably be skinned alive." I knew that if I asked for a divorce with Anlin, he would definitely not agree. But this man named Tang Yu let me know that I wasn't frigid, but a normal woman. I really felt that I should ask for a divorce with Anlin. If it dragged on like this, it would not be fair to him. Tang Yu looked at the phone and his heart softened. He said softly, "Fortunately, this person is me." She didn't sleep the whole night, and so did he. He was too excited to sleep, but he knew that in her heart, he was a pervert. If she wasn't homeless, she probably wouldn't have stayed the night. The sky would turn dark, but there would be a time when the sun would rise. Pei Chi didn't wake up until noon because she didn't fall asleep until dawn. The bed was very soft, and there was a certain pleasant smell on it. She slept like this until the sun was high up in the sky. When he woke up, it was already lunchtime. Pei Chi sat up straight, and her eyes were a little straight. She remembered that there were 2 companies that had interviews this morning. Her phone rang again. It was Anlin. She thought about it for a moment, then answered the call. Qin Anlin sounded a little tired. Chi, where are you? Tom didn't contact her for a whole 24 hours. He didn't know where she was. Qin Anlin wanted to fly back immediately, but he couldn't leave. And he didn't dare to push her too hard, perhaps because he felt a little guilty. He didn't expect that Yi Liangqiu would cause such a big problem. He was caught unprepared. He had never been in such a difficult situation. Chapter 1092. What if you run out of money? Aren't you going to contact Kime? His voice was a little stern. Chi, you're not a child anymore. You need to be taken care of. Anlin. Her voice was a little cold. I'm 25 years old. You're my wife, he emphasized. Pei Chi thought for a long time before saying softly, Anlin, let's get a divorce. This wasn't the first time she had said it, but Qin Anlin felt that this time was different. She had mentioned it twice before because of their relationship. Because she was frigid, she felt that they weren't suitable for each other, so she asked for a divorce. Now, she had only returned to B City for a few days, and she was asking for a divorce. His voice suddenly turned cold. Chi, where are you? Who are you with? No one. Pei Chi said seriously, Anlin. We're not a normal couple. She had a desire for this man named Tang Yu, but it didn't mean that she wanted to be with him, but it made her face up to how empty her marriage with Anlin was. Would Anlin be like Tang Yu, getting up in the middle of the night to satisfy his physical needs? If that was the case, then she shouldn't be his wife anymore. Pei Chi's words shocked and angered Qin Anlin. His intuition told him that something had happened. Otherwise, she wouldn't be like this. I'll be back in the afternoon. His voice was cold. His intuition told him that he had to send Chi back to New York immediately. Otherwise, she might not be his anymore. Pei Chi's body was a little cold. Anlin, are you back to send me back to America?
Yes.
He hardened his heart. Apart from not letting her come into contact with Tang Yu, there was another reason. He didn't want her to know about him and Yi Liangqiu. Although it was a thing of the past, it had left a deep sequelae. He couldn't let Chi know. He was in a dilemma, and she was throwing a tantrum with him. Qin Anlin even wanted to be ruthless and bring her to the United States. He wanted to make her his real wife so that she wouldn't have any more thoughts. Pei Chi's voice was a little sharp. I don't want to. She was a little stubborn. I don't like America, nor do I like New York. I like B City. Like B City? Qin Anlin thought to himself. She likes people in B City. He liked the people here, so he naturally felt that this city was better. Qin Anlin's voice was deep. I'll be there in the afternoon. Don't turn off your phone. He hung up the phone, turned around, and saw Yi Liangqiu. She leaned against the door, wearing a white dress. The design was simple and refreshing, completely different from her cold image on the screen. Did you call her? She asked calmly. Qin Anlin's body was a little tense. He narrowed his eyes and looked at her with some wariness. Yes. Of course, Yi Liangqiu noticed his gaze. Although she felt a stabbing pain in her heart, she still looked calm. When will you be back? Qin Anlin looked at her. I'll be back at night. I thought that you would only be at ease after sending her back to America. Yi Liangqiu walked over slowly, stared into his eyes, and said word by word, remember, Mu Yun may be in danger at any time. He needs your blood. The corner of Qin Anlin's eyes twitched, and his facial muscles trembled slightly. He looked at the woman in front of him with a fierce look in his eyes. Chapter 1093. Qin Anlin must have been angered by her words. He pinched her sharp chin with one hand. Yi Liangqiu did not look gentle and beautiful. Her beautiful chin had a cleft, and his fingers were stuck there. Qin Anlin narrowed his eyes and leaned in closer. Yi Liangqiu, if you don't want me, why did you give birth to my child 7 years ago? Huh. At that time, she was only 19 years old. He had only slept with her once, and it was just an unspoken rule. Yet, she dared to keep his child. He remembered telling her to take the morning after pill. This was an accident in Qin Anlin's life. Damn it, Yi Liangqiu had given him a surprise. Only the heavens knew that he was the one who made her famous and made her the empress. But look at what she had repaid him. A 7-year-old son, Yi Mu Yun. Yi Liangqiu laughed softly. She had never been afraid of him. She was very tall, about 168 centimeters. When she stood next to him, she did not lose out by much. She looked up and said softly, if it wasn't for the fact that Mu Yun needs a blood transfusion, I wouldn't have looked for President Qin. To Mu Yun, you're just a man who provides gold. Both of us will live a good life. What she said was reasonable, but Qin Anlin was not a simple man. He sneered, for so many years, there have been no scandals and no man. Is it really such a coincidence? It was terrifying to think about it. He had a feeling that he had been tricked by this woman. Yi Liangqiu said lightly, no scandals doesn't mean that there are no men. President Qin, you think too highly of yourself? She leaned in close to his ear. When I sleep with a man, I don't have to report it to President Qin, right? She suddenly bit the soft flesh behind his ear. President Qin, I feel that you've not had a woman for a long time. Don't you feel bored? At this moment, her body was soft against his, and her face was on the side of his neck. Qin Anlin was a man who had not touched a woman for more than 2 years, and she provoked him. This was the mother of his child, a woman who would bear him an heir. Qin Anlin suddenly had an idea. Perhaps he and Chi-Chi would be like that for the rest of their lives. There would be no sex life, and there would be no children. Moreover, it was true that Chi-Chi could not bear another child. But Yi Liangqiu had a son, and Yi Liangqiu was a beautiful woman. Qin Anlin suddenly picked up Yi Liangqiu and walked straight to her bedroom. Yi Liangqiu was stunned. She reached out and hit his shoulder. Qin Anlin, what are you doing? Didn't you wait for 7 years? He threw her onto the large snow-white bed and started to unbutton his shirt. Yi Liangqiu looked at him coldly. President Qin, I've said that I'm not interested in you. Really? He sneered. Then I want to see whether your mouth or your body is honest. He leaned forward and pressed her down. His fingers stroked her red lips gently, and he said mockingly, do you still remember? You were a virgin when you followed me. You couldn't open it at all. As he said that, he couldn't help but think of Yi Liangqiu's first time. It was the only time. The reason why he could remember it was because she was very young. She was young and her body was too delicate. It was difficult for him to open it when he wanted her. She had lost a lot of blood, and he didn't feel comfortable. It was the first time that a woman didn't feel happy when he was with her. Chapter 1094. He didn't use her anymore, and he even asked Kime to protect her from the perverts in the industry. So, Unless she was willing, no one dared to touch her. And now, he wanted to see if this Lily was still the same as before. Qin Anlin had made up his mind, so he wouldn't show any mercy to her. Moreover, he had tolerated her for long enough over the past few years. Hiding her was useless. This woman would just treat it as a vacation. Then, he would tear her apart and see if she would feel pain. Would that usually indifferent face also show pain? When the pain hit, Yi Liangqiu's eyes were filled with tears, and her nails dug deep into his back. Qin Anlin, you bastard. It hurt even more than the first time. At that time, he would at least coax her and kiss her body. But this time, he came directly. He did not have the slightest time to calm down. He just went straight to the point. Yi Liangqiu lay on the bed, her body arched in pain. Qin Anlin's thin lips pressed against her artery, his voice low and cold. Have you ever had another man? He had read countless people, so how could he not notice that she hadn't had a man for at least a few years? He could deduce that the only man Yi Liangqiu had was him. She valued her body so much, so the only possibility was that she wanted to be Mrs. Qin. Unfortunately, Yi Liangqiu, I'm married.
His voice was warm, but with a touch of coldness.
Does this count as an investment failure? She raised her head, and her eyes were filled with a touch of moisture, which was extremely alluring. Qin Anlin and Yi Liangqiu had slept together once, but he had watched the samples of her movies. At that time, he wasn't looking at a woman, but an actress, and more importantly, a product. Now, her eyes were filled with moisture, which was very similar to her acting skills when she was at her peak. He sneered. Now I believe that you deserve to be the empress. He tormented her fiercely 3 times, without any rest in between. 3 times, adding up to 5 hours. This made her suffer so much that she wanted to die, and it also made Qin Anlin startled by his own desire. 2 years was enough to turn him into a wild beast? He knew himself. In those cold-blooded, heartless, and absurd days, although he had met countless people, he could barely remember what a woman looked like. He seemed to remember Yi Liangqiu the most clearly. Yi Liangqiu, who he had only met once. She had hurt his Yi Liangqiu. Qin Anlin leaned against the bed and smoked. It was already 5:00 in the afternoon. He had delayed for a long time and should have returned to B City a long time ago. Yi Liangqiu leaned against him. She did not cry, nor did she beg. During the entire process, he knew that she was in pain. This was no different from her first time, and he had occupied her for a full 5 hours. If it was any other woman, they would not be able to take it, not to mention that this was her second time. What do you want? He asked indifferently. With her intelligence, she should know what it meant for him to want her. She could ask him for something, such as setting up a fund for Mu Yun, or even shares in King Entertainment. He would hand these over to Mu Yun sooner or later, because he and Chi would not have children. He turned his face sideways and looked at Yi Liangqiu, hoping to see a greedy face. But Yi Liangqiu only smiled lightly and lifted the blanket. 500,000, the usual price. Qin Anlin was a little stunned. 7 years ago, he had taken her virginity and that was 500,000. 7 years later, she still wanted 500,000. Chapter 1095. Yi Liangqiu endured the pain between her legs and walked to the bathroom. She paused at the bathroom door. Qin Anlin, I either want the least or the most. You can't afford the most, so I want the least. She turned around and smiled. You should go back to B City. She was so generous that she didn't seem like a woman with ulterior motives. Qin Anlin looked at her back. She was only wearing a white silk nightgown, which couldn't hide her seductive beauty. She had always been beautiful, as seductive as Venus, but all these years, he hadn't touched a single hair on her. It wasn't that she didn't have the chance to escape just now, but she didn't. Qin Anlin wasn't a simple character. He was able to cover the sky with one hand in the turbulent entertainment industry, so there had to be something special about him. Looking at the bathroom door, he walked over and yanked it open. Yi Liangqiu was half lying in the bathtub with her head raised. There was a mirror above her, and she was looking at her body that had been tortured beyond recognition by him. The so-called hunger and thirst was probably what Qin Anlin was like. So hungry and thirsty that he couldn't even care about his little baby? She chuckled. The door opened. Yi Liangqiu lowered her head slightly and looked at the man by the door deeply. Qin Anlin held her phone, and his gaze was slightly cold. How much is the deal between you and him worth? Yi Liangqiu's body trembled, and then she sat up. She was really an extremely beautiful woman. In the past, he only felt that she was elegant and moving, but as time went by, she had a kind of lively beauty. Very few women could use this word. Not avoiding his presence, Yi Liangqiu put on the bathrobe and slowly walked in front of him. She looked at him and said softly, "You saw it?" There was a call record between her and Tang Yu on it, and she deliberately didn't delete it. It was good that he saw it. Yi Liangqiu was never a little white rabbit. She had said that she wanted everything, or she might as well not have it. If he didn't love her, then it was good that he hated her. Her chin was pinched, and Qin Anlin's eyes locked onto hers. "Tell me, how much did he give you?" 100 million. Yi Liangqiu's jaw was almost crushed, but she still smiled. "Qin Anlin, I'll sleep with you." 100 million, much more than 500,000. He narrowed his eyes, wishing he could kill her. He clearly knew what it meant if Tang Yu arranged for him to sleep with Yi Liangqiu. This meant that Chi-Chi might know about it. "Yi Liangqiu, you really deserve to be the movie queen." Qin Anlin's eyes were full of coldness, and there was no pity in his eyes when he looked at her. Yi Liangqiu just smiled lightly. "Thank you, President Qin, for your compliment." He suddenly pressed against her body and said in a low voice, "Just now, did you only treat yourself as a commodity? Isn't there a trace of happiness?" "No," she said firmly. His gaze fell on her flawless face. "Yi Liangqiu, you've turned yourself into a commodity." With that, he suddenly let go of her and opened the bathroom door. He had just taken a step out when he saw a handsome boy standing in the room. Yi Muyun. Yi Muyun stood and looked at the mess in the bedroom. Mom's dress was torn and thrown on the floor, and the luxurious bed was full of marks. And Dad looked angry. Yi Muyun pursed his pretty lips, looking a little melancholic and uneasy. Qin Anlin's voice was a little low. "Yi Liangqiu, you go in first." Men were all rational. He didn't forget that Yi Liangqiu's body was full of marks. Actually, he didn't understand why he was so obsessed with her body. Chapter 1096. He had some plans for Yi Liangqiu, but he wasn't in the mood to talk to her now. What he needed to do now was to comfort Mu Yun. Qin Anlin had complicated feelings for Yi Mu Yun. He liked this son of his, but he was angry at Yi Liangqiu's actions. He reached out and rubbed Mu Yun's little head. "Daddy has something to do. I need to go out for a few hours." Little Mu Yun's gaze fell on the bathroom door, then back to Qin Anlin's face. Then, he asked directly, "Are you going to look for Chi-Chi?" Qin Anlin's heart trembled slightly, but he maintained a gentle expression. "Yes, Daddy can't ignore Mu Yun, but he can't ignore Chi-Chi either." The only thing he was satisfied with about Yi Liangqiu was that she had brought up Mu Yun well. Although this child was a little sensitive, he was very sensible. Mu Yun nodded his head obediently. Qin Anlin comforted him and patted his head. Just as he was about to leave, Mu Yun asked softly, "What about Mommy?" Qin Anlin paused. Towards this kind of question, he was a bit troubled. If it was someone else asking, he wouldn't be troubled. But it was Mu Yun, the successor whom he had the intention to groom. He pursed his lips and bent down to look Mu Yun in the eye. His gaze was especially gentle. "Your mommy is someone very important to Daddy." This kind of answer was ambiguous. Mu Yun nodded. "Daddy, Mommy won't be a third party." His tone was especially normal, as if he was narrating something. However, at such a young age, he had a different kind of boldness. Even though she had never met her father, who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere, Xiao Mu Yun was still unfazed by his favor or disgrace. Qin Anlin admired him, but he had a headache. It wasn't easy to deal with a son who was too smart. especially when his relationship with Liangxiu was so stiff. But he couldn't deny it, because he had just slept with Mu Yun's mother, and the clothes were still torn under the bed. Of course. Qin Anlin smiled. It was the first time he had compromised with such a young negotiator. He hugged little Mu Yun, and his voice was a little hoarse. Take good care of your mommy. Xiao Mu Yun nodded and watched him leave. He was so precocious that it made one's heart ache. In that instant, Qin Anlin's impregnable heart actually cracked a little. He even wanted to stop, wanted to hug Mu Yun and not leave. But it only lasted for a second. Then, he made up his mind and left. When the door closed, little Mu Yun walked to the bathroom and knocked on the door. Mommy, are you okay? Yi Liangqiu opened the door and held little Mu Yun in her arms, gently stroking his hair. Little Mu Yun leaned in her arms, and his little hands slowly tightened as he hugged his mother. Mommy, I don't have a daddy, or a new daddy is fine too. He didn't want to see his mother cry. At such a young age, he already knew that his mother was being bullied by his father. Mu Yun, Mommy won't cry. Yi Liangqiu touched Mu Yun. Mommy won't beg Daddy to keep us. Little Mu Yun nodded obediently and pressed his face close. Mu Yun will always be with Mommy. Yi Liangqiu smiled and didn't say anything else. Did Qin Anlin really think that she cared about 100 million? How could she not know what kind of foundation her deal with Tang Yu was based on? It was never about money. This 100 million was just a reason. And she didn't care if he hated her or not, because if he didn't hate her or not, he would forget about her and she would become a commodity. Yi Liangqiu hated being a commodity ever since he spent 500,000 on her first time. Because she liked him. She liked him for many years. Chapter 1097. Yi Liangqiu picked up her phone and dialed a number. She said softly, "Don't worry. I've kept what I should have." After saying that, she hung up. On the other side, Qin Anlin walked out and called Pei Chi. It was already evening, and it had been a few hours since he had said that he would return to City B. During these hours, he had been in Yi Liangqiu's bed. He kept calling, but the notification kept saying that the user's phone had been turned off. He got into the car, threw his phone aside, cursed and started the car. He held the steering wheel with one hand and dialed Keim's number with the other. His voice was cold. Keim, if you can't find Pei Chi in an hour, you don't have to go to work tomorrow. He really couldn't leave City A, but because of Keim's incompetence, he had to rush back. Keim didn't dare to disobey the order and immediately spent a lot of money to find her. Qin Anlin drove to the airport, and the private plane returned to City B in half an hour. Keim was already waiting at the airport. When he saw Qin Anlin come out, he hurriedly followed him and said in a difficult tone, "Miss Pei is in a park. I asked someone to watch her and didn't dare to disturb her." Qin Anlin didn't stop and said coldly, "Is she alone?" Keim nodded. "Miss Pei is alone with her luggage. I'm afraid that she hasn't eaten." Qin Anlin paused for a moment, and his gaze was like a knife. His voice was a little cold. "You're getting better and better at doing things." Keim touched his nose and didn't dare to say anything. He did have his own thoughts about this matter because if he listened to President Qin, he would definitely offend Mr. Tang. If no one protected him, he wouldn't even know how he died. How could Qin Anlin not know about Keim's plan? He got into the car, and Keim immediately started the car. He didn't dare to delay any longer. Actually, he thought that it was better to take her away. Otherwise, it would be troublesome if she was left in City B. President Qin wouldn't be watching. After driving for an hour, the car slowly arrived at a park. Pei Chi was squatting there with her hands resting on her cheeks. She was living on the streets, her wallet had been stolen, and she had been hungry for half a day. She tossed her suitcase aside and picked up a flower from the park in her hand. Her stomach growled as she plucked the flowers. "Call Anlin. Don't call. Call. Don't call." Before she could finish picking the flowers, her vision darkened. A slender shadow stood in front of her. She raised her head and stared blankly at Qin Anlin, calling his name unconsciously. "Anlin?" Qin Anlin pursed his thin lips and said nothing. Seeing that he was angry, she got up and patted her butt. "Anlin, I'm so hungry." His gaze had been a little cold because she had told him about the divorce over the phone, but now that he had appeared in front of her, she acted as though nothing had happened. He was a little angry that she didn't care about him. Chi-Chi, you heartless little thing. He sighed softly, put his arm around her shoulder, and helped her remove a strand of grass from her hair. Let's go eat. Were you so poor that you ate grass just now? As long as there was food, she would follow him obediently. Kaim shook his head helplessly. He really felt that this couple didn't seem like a married couple. Moreover, he had heard that President Sheen seemed to be going to City A for something big this time. Chapter 1098. No matter how he looked at it, the relationship between the two of them seemed to be one of them being fed and the other being fed. Kaim followed behind and sat at the side when they reached the restaurant so as not to disturb their conversation. After Pei Chi-Chi sat down, Qin Anlin knew that she was hungry and ordered a meal for her. Pei Chi-Chi ate until her mouth was full. She looked up at Qin Anlin and said, "Anlin, aren't you going to eat?" Qin Anlin held a cigarette in his hand, and his gaze was unfathomable. "I'm not hungry." In fact, he was hungry. He had worked out for 5 hours in the afternoon and rushed back to B-City, but he was not in the mood. Looking at Chi-Chi, there was an indescribable feeling in his heart. She had always been dispensable to their marriage. He knew that she wanted a divorce so that they would not be tied down, but he could not bear to let her go. And this intimate relationship between him and Di Liangqiu made him feel a little guilty when he faced Pei Chi-Chi. What he had thought in the afternoon was too much. He had gone overboard with Di Liangqiu, and even more overboard with Chi-Chi. Pei Chi-Chi replied with an "oh" and turned into a little pig and finished the meal. She was just short of licking the disc. After eating, she stretched out her little hand and opened it. Qin Anlin hit her little hand. "What do you want?" "Money," Pei Chi-Chi said righteously. "I don't have money. I have to live on the streets, and I don't have money to eat." She pouted. "Anlin, you're so bad." Qin Anlin smiled dryly and folded her hand. "I'm here. You don't need money." She looked at him with a hint of wariness in her eyes. Qin Anlin looked at Kaim, who was sitting across from him. Kaim expressed that she was innocent. "Kaim will send you back to New York." Qin Anlin handed her passport to her. "Leave tonight. I'll send you to the airport later." Pei Chi-Chi's eyes widened. "Anlin, I'm not going back to New York." His gaze was firm. "Chi-Chi, listen to me. Was she supposed to live in a place she didn't like just because she was obedient?" Pei Chi-Chi was about to say something when she suddenly saw a kiss mark on Qin Anlin's neck under the bright light. There were also a few blood stains. Was that left by a woman? She took out her phone and pretended to take a selfie, pouting. "I don't want to go back there. I think B-City is pretty good." She quietly took a picture of the hickey on Qin Anlin's neck and zoomed in. No matter how she looked at it, it was definitely left by a woman. From the looks of it, it was still steaming hot and had just come out of the oven. Pei Chi-Chi put down her phone. "Anlin, what I said last time." His expression immediately changed. "Don't ever mention it again." His voice was stern, and Pei Chi-Chi was shocked. After a while, she said in a low voice, "All right, I won't mention it anymore. But Anlin, are you sure you want to do this? Do you think there's still a need for our marriage to continue?" If she was really his wife, why was she frigid and he didn't force her? No husband could be so lenient. She had doubted it and went to check their marriage certificate. It was real. She didn't know how she signed it, but she knew that she didn't love him. Whether it was now or in the past, she probably hadn't loved him. Otherwise, why didn't she have the most primitive impulse when she looked at him? After going through Tangyu, Pei Chi-Chi knew that she wasn't frigid. She was also very curious and longing for a man's body. So what had Anlin been avoiding all this time? Chapter 1099. She said in a low voice, "Anlin, I'm going to the washroom for a while." Qin Anlin looked at her with a deep gaze. Go. We'll talk after you come out. Qin Anlin admitted that he was afraid. He was determined to send her back to New York. He wouldn't be at ease as long as she was in City B. And he would only be at ease if Keim sent her to New York. And Keim would stay there with her until he settled the matter. Pei Chi took a deep breath, asked the manager for the direction of the washroom, and walked over. Qin Anlin continued to smoke one cigarette after another. Keim was trembling at the side, feeling that something was wrong. He said with a trembling voice, President Qin, didn't Miss Pei take too long to go to the washroom? Qin Anlin pursed his lips and frowned. He got up and walked quickly in the direction where Pei Chi had left. Ignoring the fact that there were still people in the ladies' washroom, he opened it one by one. There were screams coming from inside, but none of them belonged to his Chi-Chi. She had run away. Qin Anlin stood in the ladies' washroom, his lips pressed into a straight line. Just then, his cell phone rang. He took it out and saw that it was a message and a photo from Chi-Chi. It was him in the photo. The focus was on the hickey on his neck. It was an obvious hickey. One look and he knew that he had slept with a woman. Qin Anlin cursed under his breath and walked out. He called Pei Chi-Chi's number, but her phone was switched off. Damn it. Look around immediately. He looked at Keim and said coldly, other than a small bag, Chi-Chi's belongings were all here. She had left alone and had no money. Where was she going to sleep? Where was she going to eat? Other than annoyance, he was also worried. Keim was scared out of his wits. She had disappeared right under their noses. President Qin was going to skin him alive. Therefore, he immediately asked someone to look for Pei Chi-Chi. However, if Pei Chi-Chi wanted to run away, how could he find her? Qin Anlin searched until late at night, but in the end, a call from City A called him back because Mu Yun was bleeding again. Both he and Mu Yun had Rh-negative blood. Right now, he was Mu Yun's moving blood bank and could not leave. Before Qin Anlin left, he told Keim to find Chi-Chi no matter what. But before boarding the plane, Qin Anlin felt that if he left, he might lose Pei Chi-Chi forever. The last few coins in Pei Chi-Chi's pocket were thrown into the bus, and she took the bus to an unknown place. She did not know where to go, but she was sure that she did not want to go back to New York with Anlin. If she went back, it would be like being imprisoned. Moreover, she felt that there was no need to continue that kind of marriage. That would be unfair to Anlin. There was justice and human desire. Now, Pei Chi-Chi felt that she had to be faithful to her own desires. She longed for a free life, to travel the world with a camera on her back, and not be bound by anyone. Just like now, even if she liked Tang Yu's body and was extremely curious about that man, she would not stop for him. She felt that she was a gust of wind, and she wanted to take the best photos in her heart. To her, his physical body was only a part of the scenery in this natural world. But now, forget about ideals and scenery, she was about to starve. Pei Chi-Chi got off the bus at a stop in the city. She touched her stomach and felt that the steak she had just eaten had been digested. There was no place for her next meal. She looked around and finally accepted that she was living on the streets. Chapter 1100. Her past was a blank. She didn't even have the chance to ask for help. Scrolling through her phone, she saw Qin Anlin's photo. She didn't feel jealous, but rather relieved. It was good that he didn't keep his chastity for her. Perhaps Anlin would have asked for a divorce if it had dragged on a little longer. No man could insist on a sexless marriage. Of course, she believed that he liked her, but she knew clearly that Anlin wasn't that person. He wasn't the person she was looking for. She hugged her knees and raised her head. Pei Chi-Chi was going to starve. Where would she sleep tonight? She wanted to cry, because she was hungry again. Tang Yu sat in his car, his elbow bent as he smoked, looking at his girl quietly. The girl squatting there, looking like she had no home to return to. He wasn't in a hurry to look for her, and merely sat there, looking at Pei Chi-Chi hugging herself pitifully. A wicked thought arose in his mind as he drove the car in front of her. Without saying anything, he continued smoking in front of the car window. Pei Chi looked up and caught sight of him. "Why are you here?" Her eyes widened as she looked at him. He was wearing a white shirt with the top 2 buttons unbuttoned. It was a little casual, but it was still good-looking. The sleeves around his elbows were rolled up as well, and his arms were firm and strong. Pei Chi's gaze became a little dazed again. She stared at him for a long time, like a puppy looking at a piece of meat. Tang Yu smiled. "Do you want to get in?" Pei Chi squatted like a dog, not moving at all. This was a wolf in front of her, and she was a lamb. She wouldn't go back with him. Tang Yu chuckled. "If you don't get in, I'm leaving." She revealed an expression that said she wouldn't fall for it. Tang Yu teased her on purpose, because this Chi was way too fun. "Pei Chi, are you sure you're not leaving?" He looked at her bag. "Do you have money?" Also, her luggage was gone. When she left this morning, she did not realize that her $3,000 had been taken by him. Just as he expected, after seeing the hickey on Qin Anlin's neck, Pei Chi left. Now, Qin Anlin should have gone to City A. Tang Yu didn't know why Anlin's obsession was so deep. A woman who had loved him for so many years, yet he didn't realize it. Yi Liangqiu was one of the few women that Tang Yu admired. She was delicate but not seductive. After being in the entertainment industry for so many years, she had always been clean. If it wasn't for the sake of Anlin, he wouldn't believe it. She even gave birth to a son for Anlin. Qin Anlin had been avoiding it all the time. Perhaps it was because he resisted such feelings from the bottom of his heart. He would rather believe in what he had and what he saw. Pei Chi raised her head and looked at Tang Yu, feeling that he was extremely detestable. He was lecherous. She wouldn't leave with him because he had treated her like that in his villa. "You might not know how safe it is at night here." Tang Yu smoked slowly, a devilish look on his handsome face. "At night, homeless people will come here to sleep. They are all men in their 40s and 50s who don't have wives." Pei Chi hugged herself and looked around. She glared at him. "You don't have a wife either. So what are you afraid of?" He opened the car door and got out, holding a cigarette in his hand. Under the black trousers, that pair of long legs was simply a walking aphrodisiac. Chapter 11:01. Pei Chi's eyes widened. In fact, she despised herself a little in her heart. She clearly knew that he was up to no good. He clearly wanted her body. But for the sake of bread and a place to live, she still didn't run away. She even thought that it would be fine if that was really the case. After all, he was very good-looking, and she really wanted to nibble on him. Pei Chi swallowed her saliva. She was scared by herself. She didn't know why she was so interested in his body. It seemed that she had never done this to anyone else. Maybe it would be fine after sleeping with him once. There was a green light in Pei Chi's eyes. Tang Yu smiled in his heart and pulled her up. "Let's go." He held her hand so naturally, as if it was a match made in heaven. She pulled her hand back. He turned his head and looked at her indulgently. "Pei Chi, are you coming with us?" She pouted and hesitated. If she didn't go, she would have to sleep on the street. In the end, she followed him obediently. Tang Yu smiled, locked the car door, and walked across the road to the opposite street. "Why don't you get in the car?" She followed him and asked with her little face raised. Tang Yu didn't walk fast in front of her. He walked at a speed that she could keep up with. It felt good to walk like this with a little girl by his side. He found the feeling of love, the part that he and Chi had skipped. "Do you have a change of clothes?" He took out a cigarette from his pocket, lowered his head, and took a long puff. Pei Chi followed him closely. Suddenly, he put one hand around her little neck and brought her into his arms. "What are you doing?" She wanted to break free, but Tang Yu hugged her a little tighter, and his voice was a little bewitching. "There is a car in front." He was dressed casually, holding a cigarette in one hand and holding her with the other, just like every ordinary couple in this world. At this time, his heart was also calm. "Oh," Pei Chi replied dejectedly. Looking at the cars on the road, she obediently stayed in his arms. Tang Yu lowered his head and looked at her. As he walked, he said calmly, Pei Chi, is it because Qin Anlin cheated on you that he gave you the green light? Pei Chi was about to explode. How did he know about Qin Anlin fooling around? That's because I've known Qin Anlin for a long time. He continued cheerfully. Do you want to know more about his women? Pei Chi did not speak. She did not want to discuss Anlin with others. At this time, the big screen in the shopping mall in front was playing Yi Liangqiu's advertisement. Tang Yu, and she stood below. He smiled slightly. Chi, Yi Liangqiu is Qin Anlin's woman. To be precise, she is one of the women Qin Anlin had in the past. The difference is that she gave birth to a son for Qin Anlin. Pei Chi was stunned. Son? Yes, his name is Yi Muyun. Tang Yu took out his phone and showed a photo to Pei Chi. It was a photo of Qin Anlin holding a boy, and a woman wearing sunglasses followed behind. Looking closely, it was Yi Liangqiu. Pei Chi's eyes were wide open. After a long time, she said, his son is so old? Tang Yu smiled. Qin Anlin never knew. Otherwise, he might not have married you. Pei Chi looked up and looked at Tang Yu absent-mindedly. You know my past, don't you? He knew Qin Anlin. If he knew so much, then he must know her past and who she was. Tang Yu smiled faintly and rubbed her hair. Pei Chi, you have to find the answer yourself. Chapter 1102. Pei Chi lowered her head. I want to know, but when I try hard to think about it, my head hurts. Hence, she had not tried hard to think about the past for a long time. Sometimes, she would dream of a voice that kept calling her Chi, calling her baby, asking her to come back. She had a feeling that she should come back to City B. There was the answer she was looking for here. But she would feel pain. Pei Chi held her head. The familiar pain started again. Her voice was weak. Medicine. Tang Yu immediately hugged her tightly. His heart ached as he took out a small medicine bottle from his bag. After looking at it, he poured out a pill and fed it to her. It was a painkiller. There was no water for the time being. He pressed on her shoulders, ignoring the strange looks from others, and sealed her little mouth. The tip of his tongue lingered against the pill as he made her swallow it. Pei Chi was stunned. He did not leave her lips immediately. Instead, he waited for her to calm down before he kissed her in a more aggressive manner. She wanted to struggle, but his hands hugged her whole body, trapping her arms in his embrace. Pei Chi was terrified. Her eyes widened as she looked at the man in front of her. She felt that the arms that were hugging her were made of steel. It was so solid that it scared her. She staggered 2 steps back and finally hit the wall behind her. She let out a soft moan. He placed a hand on the back of her head and gently rubbed her scalp. There were tears in her eyes, but they eased up a lot when he massaged her. His lips and tongue seemed to be comforting her. They were not as hurried as before. Instead, they became more soothing as he brushed his lips over and over again. She swallowed and breathed along with him. However, after she became a little more obedient, he became rough again. Her little mouth seemed like it was going to be eaten by him. She shook her head desperately, but he kept moving forward as if he was pressing on top of her. They were tightly pressed against each other, creating a series of sparks. The air was warm and humid. After a long while, there was a round of applause. Then, someone egged them on. Propose, propose, propose. Pei Chi was dumbfounded. She looked around. There were 3 layers of people inside and 3 layers outside. Everyone saw their performance? Tang Yu still holds her waist with one hand, and his thin lips are attached to her lips. His voice is particularly hoarse. Pei Chi, do you want me to propose now, or tell them that we are friends? Sex friends? You dare? She glared at him, her eyes sparkling. He kissed her on the lips. So that's a proposal? With that said, he really took out a cold object from his pocket and put it on her ring finger. She looked down and saw that it was a pink diamond. It wasn't big, only about 1 carat, but it was extremely beautiful. Pei Chi was stunned. Did he always carry a diamond ring with him? Tang Yu held her hands and pressed his forehead against hers. He lowered his head and smiled. Pei Chi, we can make it real. Mr. Tang, I have a husband. She leaned close to his ear and whispered. His fingers suddenly clasped her tightly, pressing her body tightly against his. Their eyes met, and her heart actually started to beat wildly. Just 2 hours ago, Qin Anlin was still lying on the same bed with Yiliangqiu. Pei Chi, are you sure he is your husband? He placed his hand on her chest. I don't feel that you are sad at all. I don't care. Okay? Chapter 1103. She glared at him. I don't need you to guess what I'm thinking, but you need my money to get through tonight. He chuckled. All right, if you don't listen to me, I'll leave you here. He said it as if she was a cat or a dog. Pei Chi frowned and obediently let him hold her hand, as if he was leading a little sheep. Tang Yu smiled. Thank you, everyone. My girlfriend has agreed to marry me. There was a round of applause. Pei Chi followed behind Tang Yu and stuck out her tongue. It sounded like it was true. She took off the ring and gave it back to him. This is for you. Wear it. It's a fake. It's not worth much. Tang Yu said lightly and took her into the mall. Pei Chi lowered her head and looked at it. She felt that the design was quite nice. But after thinking about it, she realized that it couldn't be real. Such an American pink diamond was worth at least $1 million. How could it be casually placed in her pocket? There must be a lot of it at home. Is it a lie? She shot back at him. Tang Yu snorted and glanced at her. You don't seem to be a girl. You're a married woman. At most, you can only be considered a young woman. You're a young woman. She glared at him. It never happened? He trapped her in the elevator and continued to tease her. I'll know when I check. Pei Chi also knew that he wouldn't do anything to her in the elevator. She just couldn't understand why he was so cold and hot all of a sudden. Tang Yu just smiled and wasn't in a hurry to move forward. Her defense was so weak that he didn't need to be anxious. The little hand in his palm was sweaty. Are you nervous? He looked down at her. Unexpectedly, Pei Chi nodded. I have a slight claustrophobia. Tang Yu was stunned. Chi didn't have it in the past. However, he still pressed her into his embrace. His warm breath filled her nose, and she slowly calmed down. Tang Yu stroked her hair, and Pei Chi smiled weakly. On the 5th floor, it was all young women's clothing. Tang Yu and Pei Chi stood side by side. Do you have a favorite brand? Pei Chi shook her head. There's no need to buy something that's too good. An ordinary one will do. These brands were quite expensive. They all cost at least a few thousand yuan. She did not want to owe a stranger too much. Are you afraid of owing me? He chuckled. Then you can pay with your body. I'm not that cheap. Pei Chi mumbled and walked into a shop. Let's take a look here. The clothes in this shop were mainly casual, and the material was all cotton. She could also wear them as pajamas. Pei Chi decided to buy 2 sets of clothes shamelessly and swipe his card. Tang Yu did as she pleased and did not participate too much. She just sat on the sofa in the lounge area and played with her phone. Pei Chi picked out a white denim t-shirt and a cotton linen dress. She went to the changing room to change. They were all very ordinary and low-key styles, but their prices were not low-key. They were both 5 to 6,000 yuan each. Pei Chi tried them on casually. They were fine as long as they could wear them. When she came out, she was about to hug her sugar daddy's thigh, but Tang Yu was not in the lounge area. The seat there was empty. She closed her eyes. Did he run away? She was about to apologize to the shop assistant when she suddenly exclaimed, Miss, the heart of a maiden on your hand is so beautiful. Heart of a maiden? Pei Chi raised her hand. This? Chapter 1104. The salesperson was almost drooling. Pei Chi looked down at her fingers again and laughed dryly. This is a fake. It's an imitation. Don't joke, Mississippi. How could this fiery color be fake? I've been interested in this for a long time. I can't be wrong, the salesperson said firmly. At this time, Tang Yu came over with a few pieces of fabric in his hand. Pei Chi didn't pay attention to it, but asked him, how can this be real? Chi, are you sure you want to talk to me about this here? We'll talk about it when we get home. He smiled casually. Pei Chi was taken aback by the smile on his face. He made it sound so ambiguous, as if they were living together. And go home? When he said those two words, her heart skipped a beat. She looked down and saw his hand. Then, her face turned red, because he was holding a woman's underwear in his hand. Why are you holding this? Her voice had an unknown softness to it. She took the things in his hand and was about to put them back. Tang Yu smiled and grabbed her arm. Chi, aren't you going to wear anything? She just needed to wash and dry her clothes. She really couldn't buy intimate clothes in front of a man. Tang Yu's voice was a little low. Stop it. You'll be laughed at. He rubbed her hair with his fingers, and there was undeniable affection in his tone, and it was so natural. Pei Chi was pushed into the changing room, petrified. After changing, she looked at herself in the mirror. The size was right, as if it had been measured. And this underwear was chosen by Tang Yu. Did that mean he knew her size like the back of his hand? Pei Chi covered her face, feeling too ashamed to face anyone. God, they had only met for the 4th time. When they went out, he had already picked a few underwear for her and packed them up. The salesperson smiled and said enviously, your boyfriend is so nice to you. He's so considerate. I've already proposed successfully. Tang Yu leaned back lazily and pinched the little sheep's face. Pei Chi smiled at him and hugged his arm. That's right. So, husband, I still want to buy a lot of things. He saw the mischievousness in her eyes and generously pinched her little face. Of course, no problem. Therefore, he brought her to a few branded stores. Swish, swish, swish. Dozens of dresses, dozens of casual clothes, and more than 10 sets of black lace underwear and pants. The beast in her heart was exposed. Pei Chi picked up the thin and transparent item and waved it in front of his handsome face. You want to wear this? Tang Yu didn't move. His gaze was deep. If you want to see, I can wear it for you. He paused for a moment. Pei Chi, there's a hotel on the 19th floor. Do you want to book a room? No need. She glared at him and said to the shop assistant, wrap everything up except for this damn thing. She reached out to him with her fair hand. Card. Tang Yu smiled and placed his black gold card on her palm. The password is 880330. Pei Chi couldn't help but look at him. Why did you use this password? It was actually the same password as hers. I just randomly thought of it. He didn't explain and just watched her swipe. There were too many things. He wrote down the address of Xia City and asked someone to send them over. He only took the 2 sets that she had bought at the beginning. Chapter 11:05. She coughed softly. If you're willing to book a room for me for a month and leave me 10,000 yuan, I'm willing. She turned her face sideways, her eyes sparkling. Call you brother. Tang Yu fastened his seatbelt slowly and smiled. Do you call me brother during sex? Pei Chi was stunned by his straightforwardness. Tang Yu turned his face sideways and looked at her under the dim light. Pei Chi, deal? Dude, deal? She did not know if she was thinking too much, but she felt that there was a deeper meaning behind his words. Her little face was tense and solemn. Tang Yu smiled and stroked her hair. I'm just teasing you. Teasing her? Was it fun? She straightened her neck and glared at him. All right, let's drive. He smiled. His handsome face was charming, especially when the two of them were in the same space. His aura was everywhere. Tang Yu reversed the car slowly, his slender hands on the steering wheel as he looked ahead. His side profile was very nice. Pei Chi looked at him for a while and felt that it was too deliberate, so she did not dare to look anymore. Later on, she realized that he was not looking at her anymore, so she peeked again. Tang Yu smiled, his eyes still focused on the road ahead. Chi, if you keep looking at me like that, I'm afraid I can't drive. With that said, there was a red light ahead. He stopped the car, looked at her sideways, and looked at her with his clear eyes. Pei Chi cried out and covered her face. I'm not looking at you. Is that so? He said mysteriously and did not correct her again. When the light turned green, he started driving. She thought that he would bring her back to the rose garden and was prepared to be taken advantage of tonight. However, his car entered an unfamiliar apartment building. Xia City? Was it for the summer? She looked at him and asked suspiciously, Is this where you, hide your mistress? Tang Yu unbuckled his seatbelt and gestured for her to get out of the car. If so, do you dare to stay here? Pei Chi immediately jumped to his side. He opened the back door of the car and took out her clothes, looking at her sideways. Why wouldn't I dare? She twirled her fingers and pouted, pretending not to be afraid. What? This beast in human clothing in front of her was quite good-looking. If anything happened, she would not suffer a loss. Tang Yu closed the car door and asked her under the bright moonlight, So you're willing to call me brother? Brother, she called out sweetly and playfully, her little hands hugging his arm. Brother, brother, brother. Tang Yu's teeth almost fell off from the sweetness. He lowered his head and looked at her. Pei Chi, we've only met for the 4th time. Girls should be more reserved. Damn it. Pei Chi glared at him and said slowly, You just said to make love. I'm joking. Pei Chi, you didn't take it seriously, did you? He bent down and the tip of his nose touched hers. It was slightly cold, and the feeling of a man's nose was somewhat similar to there. When she looked up, she could see his deep eyes and his thin lips. If he lowered his head, he would be able to kiss her. This was simply too intimate. Pei Chi bit her lip. I didn't. That's good. He smiled and straightened his body, and she instantly heaved a sigh of relief. Tang Yu ruffled her hair and said calmly, Actually, Chi, it really doesn't matter. Pei Chi was petrified. Chapter 1106. Pei Chi responded with an oh and followed him like she was in a fog. Should we take the stairs or the elevator? He didn't forget her claustrophobia and asked her. Pei Chi blurted out, More than 10 floors. Let's forget about it. She didn't think much of it after she said it, but Tang Yu smiled meaningfully. Xia City existed in the depths of Chi-Chi's memory. When they got to the elevator, she hugged his arm. The little sheep was so scared. Tang Yu held the bag in one hand and held her shoulder with the other. He said in a low voice, Are you sure you don't want to do it? She was a little scared at first, but now she was amused by him. She buried her face in his shoulder and said, Yeah, I don't want to do it. She admitted that she thought about it. She didn't have sex in her memory. She didn't have sex with Anlin, but it didn't mean that she didn't have fantasies. She liked the man in front of her, but she didn't want to destroy this desire. Sometimes, it wasn't good to have something, and all that was left was emptiness. Tang Yu just smiled, walked out of the elevator, and opened the door to the apartment. After they made up, they rarely came here, but there was always someone to clean the place. It was still the same. There was a daisy in a vase on the dining table, and there were water droplets on it. Pei Chi went in and looked around. She turned to look at Tang Yu and said, I like it here. He made a sound of agreement, and his face was a little deep, as if he was reminiscing. After a while, he said softly, Xiaoxin's mother used to live here. Pei Chi's heart ached. She looked up at him and said, Xiaoxin's mother? Tang Yu nodded. Yes, Xiaoxin's mother. What happened to her? Pei Chi didn't know why she asked, but she couldn't help asking. Tang Yu looked at her and smiled. Pei Chi, do you want to know? She nodded. It's not good to know too much about a man.
His voice was low and husky.
It's dangerous. Pei-Chi-Chi didn't dare to ask any more when she thought of the deal. At this moment, the doorbell rang. Tang Yu walked over. It was a salesperson from a certain shopping mall who had delivered the clothes they had bought. Tang Yu asked them to hang up the clothes in the changing room. Pei-Chi-Chi went over to talk to him, only to find that the pile of damn things, the black lace, had all been sent over. She puffed up her cheeks. I'm not wearing it. I'll wear it. Tang Yu sent off the service staff, turned around, and looked at Pei-Chi-Chi with a faint smile. Her eyes were watery, which made her look even more alluring. All right, go take a shower and go to bed. There are bathrobes and towels in the cabinet. He ruffled her hair. You're tired, too. The homeless little guy must be tired after wandering outside for a whole day. The way he looked at her was full of love, and Pei-Chi-Chi was a little dazed. Pei-Chi-Chi, if you keep looking at me like that, I'll think that you can't bear for me to leave. His voice was especially deep and alluring in the dark night. She didn't speak, but just looked up at him. Actually, she couldn't bear for him to leave. She just looked at him like that. He smiled and caressed her rosy red lips with his fingers. He lowered his head slightly. Do you still want to call me brother? She sprang up at once, like a rabbit. Unfortunately, she hit his chin. Chapter 1107. After staring at her for 2 seconds, he suddenly pulled her hair and let her lean against his chest. His handsome face leaned down and lightly kissed her little mouth. It was very gentle and there was a kind of leisurely taste to it, but his body did not express it like this. His body was very tense, as though it was about to explode. He kissed her lightly and said in a low voice, I'll stay. Okay? Pei-Chi-Chi's little hands tugged at his shirt and rubbed against it. Tang Yu restrained himself and let go of her. He patted her little, but said in a low voice, Hurry up and take a shower. He didn't say that he would stay, but he didn't say that he wouldn't stay either. Pei-Chi-Chi just felt that she couldn't stay with him anymore. She ran to the bathroom. After taking a shower, she weakly realized that she hadn't taken her bathrobe. Hence, Pei-Chi-Chi meowed like a kitten in the bathroom. Tang Yu. Tang Yu stood by the window and was smoking a cigarette. When he heard her calling him, he turned his head and smiled. What's the matter? Half of her little face peeked out from behind the door, and she meowed like a kitten. I didn't take my bathrobe. His hand that was holding the cigarette trembled, and he walked to the changing room to get her a bathrobe and underwear. Pei-Chi-Chi took the bathrobe and put it on. Her long hair was wet, and she was blowing her hair in front of the window. Her bathrobe was rolled up, and her slender legs were fair and straight. His eyes seemed to be on fire. The cigarette but shook, and he said in a low voice, I'm going to take a shower. Pei-Chi-Chi turned her head. You're staying? Her long hair was still wet and draped over her shoulders. The thin bathrobe couldn't hide anything. It was alluring no matter how one looked at it. Tang Yu walked over and was very close to her. He lowered his head and looked at her. Pei-Chi-Chi, we've only met 4 times. For you to appear in front of me like this means that you like me. With that, he kissed her lightly on the lips and went to the bathroom. Pei-Chi-Chi was left standing there, not knowing what to do. She liked him? She shook her head violently. Of course not. It was because he was homeless. Pei-Chi-Chi was lying to herself. She obviously had designs on him, on his body. Pei-Chi-Chi blew her hair so hard that it was straight and dry. When Tang Yu came out, she had brewed fruit tea and poured 2 cups on the table in front of the sofa. She had fallen asleep on the sofa. He smiled. He really looked like a child, drooling at such a big age. However, he still drank her fruit tea. It was sweet and sour, and tasted just like the one she used to make. He carried her to the master bedroom and adjusted the air conditioner to a comfortable temperature. He lowered his head and kissed her smooth forehead. He said goodnight in a low voice and walked out. He needed a cigarette to calm down his overflowing desire. He knew that if he wanted it, she would be his tonight, because she wanted him too. But he didn't want her to fall in love with him so soon. In the dark night, he stood by the window and smoked quietly. However, he was no longer lonely. In the bedroom, Pei-Chi-Chi quietly opened her eyes. Leaving just like that? Just a kiss on the forehead and he left? She rolled on the bed. Shunin moaned. Ouch. Lying flat on his back, he reached out his hand and touched his forehead and his lips. She could feel that he was restraining himself. But what was he waiting for? Why was he restraining himself? Pei-Chi-Chi was horrified to find that she actually wanted to sleep with Tang Yu. She hugged the quilt and rolled around, moaning. When Tang Yu returned to the bedroom, it was already 11:30. He thought she was asleep. Chapter 1108. Hugging her in his arms, he stared at her beautiful face under the dim light. His Chi-Chi remembered him from her body to her heart. Otherwise, why wasn't she lying on the same bed with someone else? At this moment, his heart was racing and he really wanted her. However, he restrained himself and just kissed her and closed his eyes. After a while, he smiled and patted the person in his arms. Pei-Chi-Chi, if you really want it, I can. Cooperate. Her face was red and she bit her lip. I don't want it. She had been pretending to be asleep, but her stiff body couldn't fool him. If not, go to sleep. He pulled her into his arms. Kids shouldn't think too much. I'm not thinking too much, she muttered. You're the one who's sleeping on the same bed with me. She kicked him in the foot in a petulant way. Tang Yu chuckled. There's only one bed here. Otherwise, where would you let me sleep? As he said that, he turned over and pressed her down. Sleep here? HM? Get down. Pei-Chi-Chi was anxious, and she hit him with her little hand. Get down. He didn't make things difficult for her. He turned over and lay flat. Don't worry, I won't touch you. He paused for a moment before looking at her. There'll be a storm after midnight. Her eyes widened. All right, let's sleep. The corner of his mouth turned up. I'm not that desperate. Pei-Chi-Chi was humiliated. She kicked him and turned her back to sleep. He didn't carry her and just lay flat on his back, wearing only a bathrobe. At this moment, everything was perfect. She was by his side. After midnight, there was indeed a storm and the weather was hot and humid. Even with the air conditioner in the room, they could feel the heat. Pei-Chi-Chi tossed and turned. Because he was beside her, she couldn't fall asleep. In the end, she hugged his arm without a backbone. It seemed to be much better this way. She fell into a deep sleep with satisfaction. Tang Yu lowered his head and looked at the pig-like child. He smiled slightly. Dawn. The sky was clear. The morning light penetrated through the curtains and gently shone on the luxurious bed. Pei-Chi-Chi's blanket was kicked up to her waist. Her small hand was placed flat on Tang Yu's smooth abdomen, and the other hand was placed on an indescribable place. Her little face was calm, and her face was pressed against his chest. Her long black hair was scattered, and she looked indescribably beautiful. This scene was peaceful and beautiful. When Tang Yu woke up, he lifted his body slightly to take a look. Then, he smiled and continued to lie flat. Although it was hard to bear, this kind of torture was also sweet. It wasn't until 8:00 that Pei-Chi-Chi woke up. When she opened her eyes, she saw a white bathrobe with her saliva on it. Is she drooling? Anlin, why am I sleeping in your bed? She asked in a daze, and then hugged his waist with her little hands. Why are you still in bed today? Anlin? Tang Yu narrowed his eyes, wishing he could strangle her to death. She was on his bed, calling out Qin Anlin's name. Although he knew that nothing had happened between them, he could tell from her words that she and Anlin had a good relationship. At least, there were feelings. That was why she was so natural, and why she was not guarded against Qin Anlin. At that moment, Tang Yu's heart was in turmoil, but he quietly lowered his head and kissed her. It's me, Tang Yu. Mrs. Qin. The last 3 words were uttered through gritted teeth. Pei Chi was so shocked that she almost jumped up. Mrs. Qin? Chapter 11:09. He held her waist with his big hands and didn't let her get up. He said mockingly, I'm honored to be able to satisfy you, Mrs. Qin. With that, he kissed her deeply. The kind of kiss that made her toes curl up. Pei Chi was a little scared. While she was a little dazed, he suddenly let go of her and got up to take a shower. Pei Chi saw him soar to the sky. He turned around and glared at her, and then went to the bathroom. Pei Chi hugged the quilt and lay down again. She looked up at the ceiling and murmured, he must be going through menopause. Pei Chi, I heard it. His gritted teeth came from the bathroom. Oh, she buried her face. She didn't know why she felt so comfortable here. Why wasn't she guarded against this man at all? It was as if it was normal to be by his side. Maybe it was because his body was very attractive. Pei Chi smiled silently and picked up her phone to open it. There were countless missed calls, all from Qin Anlin. She thought about it and called him. At least, she told him that she was safe and didn't let him worry. Qin Anlin's voice was a little cold. He probably guessed who she was with. Chi, do you have to do this? Pei Chi paused for a moment and then said slowly, Anlin, I'm not with him, but I don't hate him. You and Yi Liangqiu have a son. Is our marriage not suitable? If she loved him deeply, if they had a happy marriage, even if he had someone else before, even if they had a son, she still wouldn't let go of his hand easily as long as he loved her. She would give him time to deal with the problem, and she would treat the child well. But she had such an awkward relationship with Anlin. Why didn't she give Yi Liangqiu and the child a chance? Actually, she was more willing to let Anlin be happy. After living with him for 2 years, she really had feelings for him. They were like family. He was more than a friend. He was like a brother to her. No matter what trouble she caused, no matter how willful she was, he would tolerate her. Sometimes, she would also wonder if she should try to love Anlin. She had tried, really, but she was just a little short. The voice in her heart kept telling her that it was not Anlin. She tried to accept it and become a normal married couple with him, but she was still afraid at the crucial moment. The body, perhaps, is the most honest. She didn't know if she had ever been entangled with this man named Tang Yu, but she thought that she must know him, and he must know her. Otherwise, how could they sleep together so defenselessly? She didn't have to worry that he would force himself on her. This peace of mind surpassed what she felt for Anlin. Qin Anlin's voice was cold. I can promise not to be with Yi Liangqiu. Can you promise never to be with Tang Yu? After he finished speaking, he turned around and saw Yi Liangqiu standing behind him. There wasn't much expression on her face. It was just like when she was acting. She was wearing a mask. Qin Anlin was a little annoyed and ignored her. Yi Liangqiu laughed mockingly. Qin Anlin continued to speak coldly into the phone. Chi, there are problems with our marriage, but we don't need a divorce. I will make good arrangements for Mu Yun. As for the rest, it's not important. Pei Chi asked him softly, Anlin, are you tired? Chapter 11:10. Anlin, I'm not as heartless as you think. She sighed. It'll be better if we change our way of getting along. Let you go and let you be with Tang Yu? His voice was a little hoarse. Did you two sleep together last night? Pei Chi was shocked. She and Anlin were husband and wife. But when everything was torn apart, it was so cruel. She could tell him calmly that she didn't care that he had a son, and he could say that she wanted to sleep with someone else in a mocking tone. Pei Chi's voice was a little hoarse. Anlin, I can't give you happiness. You're the one who's not willing to give it to me. He sounded a little tired. Chi, you're against me from the bottom of your heart. It's just like when you went to Dr. York. You've never thought of improving our relationship, have you? Pei Chi-Chi's heart was filled with misery. How could she not know how much he spoiled her? She wanted to love him, but there was nothing she could do. Guilt, sadness. Qin Anlin said, Chi-Chi, go back to New York, okay? Wait for me there. I'll go over after I'm done. If Yi Liangxia was willing, he could take Mu Yun away with him. Chi-Chi wouldn't mind. They could still live the same life as before. A sexless marriage. He had already given up on the idea of finding a woman to settle things with. That would be unfair to Chi-Chi. As for Pei Chi-Chi, he was extremely upset. However, she wouldn't think that his suggestion was a good idea. It wouldn't be fair to him, and she didn't want to be stuck in it for the rest of her life. One day, she would meet the man she wanted to love. She had to be free. However, she wouldn't force Anlin to divorce. That would be cruel to Anlin. Anlin, time will change everything, she said softly. Don't hurt her. She gave birth to your child and raised him for 7 years. Qin Anlin closed his eyes. Chi-Chi, half a year. I'll give you freedom in this half a year. Tell me your decision in half a year. This was his biggest concession. He knew that the harder he pushed, the further she would run away from him. Just don't let me not see you, he said in a low voice, lowering his posture to the lowest. There was no doubt that Qin Anlin was smart. He had taken a big risk, but his humble attitude had touched the softest part of her heart. Pei Chi-Chi slowly put down her phone. Anlin agreed, but she felt sad in her heart. Tang Yu, who was standing at the door of the bathroom, heard it and smiled silently. He knew that his little sheep was soft-hearted again. Qin Anlin's move of advancing by retreating was also brilliant, but he didn't mind. He walked over and smiled. Talking to Anlin? Pei Chi-Chi felt a little dizzy when she saw him dressed neatly. If he and Anlin were friends, then sleeping on the same bed with him was a little ahem. Although they hadn't really slept together, it wasn't far from it. They had kissed and touched. She replied with then leaned against the window and looked outside. She murmured, Tang Yu, no matter what my relationship with you was in the past, I don't want to hurt Anlin. She leaned against the window and looked at him. He is very important to me. Tang Yu sighed in his heart. If Pei Chi-Chi had said this in the past, it would have been a huge joke. But at this moment, she couldn't be more serious. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.